We are recording. I'm also going to log on to Facebook. All right, so we have some participants joining us. Welcome to Chebacco Chats. We're just getting the Facebook stream going at the same time here, so give us a moment and we'll get started. All right. Great. So I think we are streaming on Facebook as well. My name is Rainey Bench, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Carolyn Rapkevian, who is the new Executive Director for the Bar Harbor Historical Society. And I'm really excited, even though Carolyn is new to the Bar Harbor Historical Society, she and I have been colleagues working together since I was at the Abbey and you were at the National Museum of the American Indians. So
Yes.
For at least 10 or 12 years, we've been crossing paths in our various vocations within the museum world. So it's been a lot of fun. And maybe you just want to give a little more of your background to the audience, Carolyn?
Sure. Well, I think I'm unusual in that I knew as a child that I wanted to work in museums, because I realized that if you work in a museum, you get to go to school your whole life. So I've worked in history museums and art museums and children's museums, science museums, cultural museums. And along the way, it turned out that I got good at opening museums. And so that's what brought me to the Smithsonian to help open the National Museum of the American Indian in New York and then in DC. And so I've been over 40 years in museums, and 26 of it at the National Museum of the American Indian, and always planned to live in Bar Harbor full time. And I love history. I'm still learning about the history of Bar Harbor. So that's why this is so exciting for me.
Yeah, well, welcome. We're really happy to have you there and here with us on the island full time. And I'm gonna screen share the presentation here in a moment. So the Bar Harbor Historical Society has been doing some pretty exciting things lately, including opening a new series of exhibits in the estate that you recently purchased, La Rochelle. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We moved into the building in October. We are on the first floor now with our exhibitions, and we're beginning to plan the exhibitions that will be on the second floor next year, we hope. La Rochelle is a 41-room Georgian Revival mansion built for the Bowdens in 1902 to 1903. So here's a picture of the front of it, and it's on the water. You can't see that in this photograph. And their youngest daughter, Edith Bowden, she summered with her parents in the mansion. She devoted her life to improving the treatment of horses, and she built water troughs and provided pails at water sources on MDI and beyond. And this scrapbook contains snapshots of all the water buckets on MDI. I think the National Park Service did a survey to locate all of these places in the park, and I'm really interested in locating the rest of them. But let's go back to the tour of the building.
Yeah, so tour of that gorgeous estate, and here we'll get started.
So this is the foyer, and we first talk about Wabanaki people at the waterfront of Bar Harbor, and you can see the waterfront through the door on the back piazza. We have a small collection of baskets made by noted basket makers. And if you look at the slide on the left, you can see the baskets. Notice the basket on the top shelf. I suspect that it was made by Passamaquoddy basket maker Angela Neptune Barnes, perhaps in the 1940s or 50s. I was researching her and I saw this basket or an identical one in a photo of her in her home. And hopefully you'll visit the museum, look underneath the basket, and you'll see that the standards were turquoise, and where the handles were attached, you can see that the weavers were raspberry color, but of course the natural dyes fade over time. So that's what it looks like now. Down in the bottom right-hand corner is a basket that was used by Harry Rodick to sell flowers when he was a boy in the 1880s. Was this a Penobscot basket? I'm not sure. I'm looking forward to researching this further. And the letter on the right is a letter that was written in 1881. The prominent citizens of Bar Harbor successfully petitioned the town to remove Wabanaki people from the waterfront below the lawn of La Rochelle and the nearby mansions. And this is the first page of the 4-page letter. I'm looking forward to understanding more about the history and the circumstances that prompted this letter.
Yeah, and they were successful in removing the Wabanaki from the waterfront and back to the ball field, which eventually ended up in really damaging the economic sustainability of the encampments because they were so far sort of out of the way of people being able to go in and purchase baskets like you've got here on display.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we talked briefly about the artists and rusticators and about the steamers that brought tourists to the island. And the next slide is the dining room of the mansion. And in the dining room, we explore the era of the grand hotels. And here on display, you can see some early hotel registers. One is from the Agamont House that's in the picture on the left. But we have a couple more here from the Grand Central. And we also have objects from the hotels, clothing, period clothing, furniture, and china from the era as well. Next one. And in the living room, we explore the cottage era. We have furnishings and fashions and photographs. And this piano was played by the most famous pianist of the time, Paderewski. He performed at the Building of the Arts, and he used this piano when he stayed at the Primrose Cottage. And by the way, if you check out our Facebook page, as a virtual program, instead of live concerts, which we hoped to have had this summer, every Sunday I'm posting a link to a historic recording of the artists who performed at the Building of the Arts. They're not the actual performance at the Building of the Arts, but they are the artists who performed and a period recording of them.
That's really exciting. That's a lot of work to try to dig out all the names and people who performed.
It's really been fun. Looking that up. I even found a film of Ted Shawn and his men dancers. And so you can see that in the museum, but it's also a Facebook post.
I found when we were touring the rooms together, that video to be really interesting. The dance is so, it's like really militaristic, but also quite acrobatic and beautiful. It's quite a find that you.
Yeah,
were able
Ted
to
Shawn,
get
for
that.
those of you who don't know, he was really a pioneer of American modern dance. And he and his wife, Ruth St. Dennis, together founded the modern dance movement. So it was, he performed at the Building of the Arts.
That's
And
amazing.
you can see the program in one of our exhibitions, the printed program.
Very cool.
So this is the reception room of the mansion where guests would be received. And here we have an exhibition that I call Pastimes and Play. It's about recreational activities from swimming, canoe races, sailing regattas, concerts, dances, games. We have children's clothing, we have toys. And in the left slide, you can see a Victrola. On the Victrola is a record that is the Bar Harbor Society Orchestra. We have a whole collection of the Bar Harbor Society Orchestra, 78 records. And I digitized some of them so you can hear them play on a modern player. But I'm really curious about the Bar Harbor Society Orchestra. It was a swing band, and the band leader was Ben Selvin. He had other bands as well. I think the Bar Harbor Society Orchestra was in existence from about 1927 to 1934. And he recorded Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, and others. And I'm looking to find out if they actually performed in Bar Harbor or if they just had this name. There is a Bar Harbor, it's not a town or a municipality, but it's a place across from Jones Beach. So it was, they recorded in New York, so I don't really know if it's just a coincidence that it's Bar Harbor. But anyway, if anybody knows the answer to this, please get in touch with me.
You can post it in the chat. We'll also have opportunities for questions too. So if you have questions for Carolyn, don't hesitate to post it in the chat, or we're also on Facebook Live. You can post comments or questions there, and we'll try to make sure we have time to answer those. So this is really a very interesting story that you were telling me when we were going through the tour.
Yeah, this doll was made by the F&B Toy Company sometime between 1912 and 1920. My friends at the African American Museum of History and Culture helped me identify it. And African American dolls are pretty rare. This is referred to as a grumpy doll because of its facial expression. And it was also called a Topsy doll, referring to the character in Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's made from composition, which is pressed wood chips, and it has movable arms and legs. And you can see she's been well worn and used. But I'm curious about her history. You know, who owned her? Was it somebody who lived on the island or visited? So I need to do a little bit more research to find out about this. This is the flower room of the mansion where fresh flowers were brought in each day, and we devote it to Beatrix Farron, who designed or consulted on the sunken garden at the La Rochelle mansion. And here we feature some of her possessions and her clothing. And Rainey, I want to tell this story. I was just repairing some of the lace on one of the dresses that is displayed here. I worked at one time in a costume and textiles collection and did some conservation work. And while I was doing this very carefully, I had, you know, white gloves on, and I was just alone in the mansion this winter. And I'm working on this, and all of a sudden I got a whiff of her perfume because it was in the dress, and it was really magical. So.
Wow, that's amazing. And speaking of lace, I found it really fascinating that Beatrix Farron, in addition to her work with flowers, was also a collector of antique lace. And you've
Right.
got some of her displays that she made of lace that now you're displaying at the mansion.
Yes, you can kind of see it, the large panel on the wall to the left. This is a collection of antique lace that she and her mother actually collected and made this display panel. And it says panel 1. So presumably they made another or more panels, but take a close look when you visit. There's some 17th century lace and 18th century, so it's fascinating.
Yeah, amazing. And speaking
Uh,
of Beatrix Farrand, these pictures I also found really fascinating in your
yeah,
collection.
she commissioned an artist to illustrate her vision of what Bar Harbor could be. She presented this to the Village Improvement Association. So we have 5 of these illustrations, and they have window boxes and trellises and flowers throughout. And Rainey, I know you're particularly interested in these. They look like watercolor illustrations, but someone recently suggested, actually one of our docents suggested that they might be photographs that were colorized and painted over. So I think I really need an art historian or an artist to help me look closer at these.
Yeah.
In the library, we display some of our archival materials relating to George Dorr, as well as some of his prized possessions. And on the left is a letter from Marconi, the inventor of the radio. It's not shown in this slide, but we have a letter from Dorr to Franklin Morris in reference to this letter from Marconi. And Marconi is replying to the secretary of the Bar Harbor Board and Trade. So I need to learn a little bit more about that organization. And he is declining the invitation to put an experimental wireless telegraph station on Green Mountain. Now, you probably know that he was a young man when he was proposing this idea of wireless telegraph, which is what we know now as radio. And he mentions in this letter, he had just put a station in Nova Scotia, and he was going to be building one on Cape Cod. You can still visit the station on Cape Cod today. So this, to me, is a really fascinating moment in history, and it's a really interesting letter to have in our archive. We also interpret the history of the Otter Cliffs radio station, so that was a little later in history, as well as Bar Harbor authors, including the very famous mystery writer Mary Roberts Reinhardt, and we have some of her things and books in the library as well. And this relief map was modeled by Robert Abbey. And Rainey, you know a little bit more about it than I do. I was fascinated by this, and so we display it, but maybe you can talk about it.
I don't know a whole lot other than when I was at the Abbey Museum. The Sur de Mont location has a really large version of the same relief map. That's the layers of plaster to make it so it's actually 3-dimensional. And we had always heard at the Abbey Museum that there were 3 of these maps that were produced. And I thought they were produced by Robert Abbey himself,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Abbey. There was the large one, and then this one, and one other one that I had heard was really big, but I don't know what happened to it, if it was maybe became part of the parks collection. And you and I were talking about why he made these, if it was a hobby or if he were making them for displays to be either at his Trailside Museum. He passed away before it opened, so I'm not sure where these were in his history of developing the Trailside Museum in the park. But it would be interesting to know if the 3rd map is out there somewhere. we're getting a comment from Facebook that Julia Gray, of course, is also was my colleague at the Abbey for a long time, and she can tell us a little bit more about it too.
Oh, that's
so,
great. Thank you, Julia.
yeah.
We'll connect. This is the Butlers Pantry, and it doesn't look like a Butler's Pantry. It was modernized in years before we came to La Rochelle. But here we have an exhibition that we call Working Life in Bar Harbor. And we're looking at the early trades and businesses, 46 dairies on the island, and what it was like working for the hotels and for cottage residents. And on the left here, we have Marion McIntyre's original handwritten recipe for Jordan Pond House popovers. So that's an exciting thing to see. Let's
Very cool. Wait, I'm going to actually pop back really quick one slide.
Oh, okay.
Because, oh, maybe not, it doesn't go backwards. The Facebook feed has a little bit of a delay, and Julia made another comment about the map that he made them when his health was failing and he couldn't do much else. So these were made directly by him toward the end of his life. And then Willie Granston shares that there are actually more than 3. So I had heard rumor of 3, but he says more. The Northeast Harbor Library has 2, and he knows of another one that shows only one side of the island that was given to a friend of Dr. Abbey. So that's very exciting. And then while we're here, we've got another woman who's a doll expert. The topsy-turvy usually refers to a 2-headed rag doll that can be flipped to reveal its white face or black face. The F&B might be a topsy after Uncle Tom's Cabin, but is not what is usually referred to as a topsy-turvy.
Right. Yes, I didn't mean topsy-turvy. That's different. But
okay.
Yeah.
And then Ron Epp says, regarding the Abbey maps, Julia helped me prepare a narrative for creating Acadia National Park, but I have more documents about that, and we'll review them and get back to you about what I can add to the conversation.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
it's so exciting to have, so many experts in the community, and some of you I haven't met yet because of the pandemic, and I'm really looking forward to it. So.
All right, and Julia's wondering if the Northeast Harbor Library maps are the 2 that were once at the park, but that the park no longer has a record of. So that conversation continues to generate.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, we have a small display about the fire at 47. You can't see it in this slide, but we have some items that survived the fire, and we have a lot of newspaper clippings here in this scrapbook. And we have a documentary video that the museum made last year, so you can see that. You can also buy that video online on our website. This is a really interesting object. This is an Ambrotype portrait. Ambrotypes were created in about the 1850s to 1860s. They were created using glass coated in chemicals, producing a negative image that became visible when the glass was backed by black material. And it's surrounded by what's called a tinsel painting. And tinsel paintings are reverse paintings on glass. And then ladies would make these, and then they crumple basically aluminum foil behind the glass, and that's the effect that you get. And they were popular from about 1850 to 1890. So this is a combination of the 2. And we don't know who is in this portrait. And I would love, if anybody recognizes this family, I'd love to know who they are. Maybe we'll post a close-up of this on our Facebook page and put it out there, and maybe somebody will help us see who this is. But I'm guessing it is between 1855 and 1860 based on the clothing. This is the servants' call box in the mansion. It's on the third floor where we store our collections. But I wanted to include a photograph of it because the third floor is where the servants resided when the Bowdens were in the mansion. It gives us a clue about the workings of the household. And we hope with our future exhibitions to interpret the story of not only the Bowdens, but also the maids and butlers and gardeners and chauffeurs and others who really supported the families. So there's a lot more research to do on this topic as well.
Yeah.
The La Rochelle gift shop features reproductions of the museum's collections and mementos of Maine's bicentennial and other unique items. And finally, visitors are welcome to enjoy the porches and the gardens. So that's the tour.
That's really very exciting. And thank you for that tour. I can open it now out to more questions or comments or any information that people have. I will say I've got another Facebook post where Renee Coate mentions that my great-grandfather, Richmond Karst, passed away in the fire, and she's trying to gather information on him. So what kind of availability do you have, especially in the pandemic, and also you just moved everything to La Rochelle? What do you have for researchers?
We're still organizing the collection, so we're not really ready to host research. Hopefully, we are going to, we'll open exhibitions next summer. And in the meantime, we are working on organizing things, unpacking still, actually, not everything's unpacked. But in the coming years, we definitely will welcome people to come, whether you're doing family research or research for a publication. So we're really eager to have people use the collections and the archives.
We had another question about cataloging the collections. Are there plans to do a full catalog of the collection?
Yes, and we are a brand new member of the History Trust, so we are looking forward to being part of the group of historical societies and libraries and museums on the island, and we are going to start that in earnest very soon.
So this whole transition has happened, and it was really exciting, and everybody's getting geared up to open up, and then COVID hits. So how's that affected your ability to give tours and welcome people to the mansion, and what are you doing to sort of overcome those challenges?
Well, we opened at the beginning of July, and things are going very well. We are open on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and visitors can make reservations in advance online, or you can also walk up and come in to the museum. But we only allow 10 people per hour, and we require masks. We are keeping all the doors and windows open, so we have a lot of circulation. That's not a usual practice for museums, but it's a healthy practice for now. And we're sanitizing and cleaning things daily, but also on the days that we're not open. We had hoped very much to do a lot of programming this summer, and as I said, we haven't been able to do that, but we are going to try our first program on September 5th, on the museum grounds, co-hosted with the Seal Cove Auto Museum. We are going to have a free outdoor exhibition of classic cars and fire trucks, and that will be from 10 to 4, and the museum will be open that day as well. And one other virtual program, actually our first virtual program that we're gonna try, will be the following Wednesday on September 9th at 5:30 6:30, cocktail hours. So we're going to have a free program on the history of cocktails and mixed drinks by researcher and educator Richard Powers. And he'll talk about historic punches he'll talk about Prohibition, Parisian Bohemian art, favorite cocktail recipes of American jazz age celebrities, and much more. So he's a collector and a researcher, and actually he's a dance teacher. And while he was researching vintage dances, he discovered that a lot of it was entwined with the history of cocktails.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful that you're able to get some programming together and available, and I hope people will attend the car show and the lecture.
Yeah, so check out our website and our Facebook page for info on those. Yeah.
Perfect. And we have probably time for this one last question, which is, to what extent do you have collecting, exhibiting, and offering researchers artifacts from other island villages?
Help me understand the question, Rainey. Is it?
So I would imagine, I guess maybe the core of the question is artifacts from other island villages. So do you have?
Are we collecting them, or are we?
And exhibiting and offering researchers access to them, but
yeah. Well, we really are trying to focus on Bar Harbor, and I'm still learning what's in the collections. So I haven't necessarily specifically seen things that go beyond Bar Harbor in general.
Yeah, I think, on the island, it seems, which is really, I think, a pretty amazing resource, is each village has its own historical society that functions to tell the story of its community. And then the Mount Desert Island Historical Society kind of serves a role of interpreting a larger story of how are all these communities connected and what is an island-wide history. So I think that's sort of how the breakdown has generally been. And so together, like, nobody can tell Bar Harbor's story better than the Bar Harbor Historical Society, for sure. But how Bar Harbor relates to the other communities on the island and sort of these island-wide bigger stories that are not as specific and not as local, then that seems to be a role that we can fill at the MDI Historical Society. Mm-hmm. So I hope that helps answer that question. We're happy to help connect people. And then, as you mentioned, the History Trust, which is an organization of 11 different collecting libraries, historical societies, and museums on MDI and also the outer islands, really is coming together to be able to share all those resources in one common place. So you could find that from any of our websites to be able to search those common shared collections. So this half an hour, as Tim always says at the end, it always goes so fast, but I just really am so excited to have the opportunity to share La Rochelle with a wider group of people, and appreciate your effort and really hard work with your team and your volunteers and your board to pull all that together. It looks like an incredible amount of work, but it's beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, and stay tuned for next week. We'll have our next Chebacco chat at same place, same time. And Tim Garrity will be back with you for that. And thank you so much, Carolyn. And thanks everybody for your participation and your questions. All right, take care.